Skye Hampton, Senior Division, Individual Performance, Modus Operandi, Jack the Ripper. In the year 1888, Whitechapel was a small suburb next to London, England. Now, they had buildings up to 4 stories tall, but they were crammed. So much so to the point that there were 3 times the amount of people in that small little space than that of the Bronx in New York. People were dying daily. There were drunkards, and people were often resorted to nothing other than prostitution for their livelihood. Well, back in 1888, the only option that police had to catch a killer was either through a confession or through a witness catching the perpetrator in the act. That was until one man came along, or a woman, I guess you could say, Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack got his name from a letter. I do believe it was the Dear Boss letter. If you look in your packets, you will see a copy of the letter. At the end, it says, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name." Now, through this killer, he was the first serial killer that the world had ever seen before. A new type of a murderer, a new criminal. Nobody understood what he was capable of or what he was going to do next. So in order to catch this dangerous criminal, the police force had to come up with a new method of catching criminals like this. This was modus operandi. Now, modus operandi is commonly used today. If you look at Carl Eugene Watts, the Sunday morning slasher, they figured out these similarities throughout the killings. They were all women. They were all found on Sundays. They were all killed in the early mornings of Sunday. They all had their throats slashed, similar to that to the victims of Jack. They found these similarities, and that is how they tied all these murders together. And through these murders, they were able to catch the killer. That was the primary goal of the task force of Scotland Yard. Over 300 men were put together to catch this killer. They couldn't. I mean, even to this day, his name is still unknown, his true identity. It wasn't until the year 1892 that fingerprints would be able to be used to catch a killer. And in the year 1900, blood was used for identification. Those are big landmarks in the world of criminology, but not as big as modus operandi. If you take a look at the photos of the victims on the first page, you will find that this was the most savage murder of them all. In this one, he went overboard. Her throat was slashed, and he went more than that. He let out his full rage on this one. Now, if you study these murders, you will see that with all of them, the women were prostitutes. They were drunk. They had a history of prostitution. They had all been kicked out, divorced, had kids. They all had to resort to this as their last option. Now, it is theorized that the women would have brought their killer to a small, quiet, dark, and remote place. He would have come up from behind them with his knife like so and slashed. It is believed that he was left-handed, as he first cut from right to left and then left to right. In one case, the lady's throat was cut so deep you could see her spinal cord in the back. Police were stuck. They had no way of catching him. And so they spent many years trying to catch this killer. In 1888, women, children, men, they were all the same. They had over 800 people detained. Over 800 were questioned. Over 800 were investigated, but not a single person was charged with the murder of these 5 women. The Chemical Five, they're called. Now, in the Dear Boss letter, he talks about how he was proud of himself. He talks about Leather Apron. That is the name that they gave one of their suspects. A Jewish Pole named Aaron Kosminski. He was known to be a butcher, and he, of course, had a leather apron to protect his clothes. They found this leather apron next to the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. 29 Hanbury Street is where one of the women was found. In the Dear Boss letter, he says, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they do look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal." Now by this, he's talking about his own methods. He's giving them clues. He's leading them into this new idea, this new way of catching a killer. He's talking about how he slashed her throat quick enough that she didn't have time to scream. It is believed that he was a doctor or a butcher, because at the time, it would have been very dark in the early hours of the night. In one case, he managed to remove her liver. And in the Mr. Lusk letter from hell, it talks about how he fried up one half of her kidney and ate it. He sent the other half to Mr. Lusk. Now, some believe that the letters were sent by prankster as a hoax, a way to get their name in the paper. But others believe that this was real and authentic. There's no way to prove which is which. But one thing that they can prove is that this is one of the most significant murder cases in the history of criminology. There's also a letter called the Saucy Jackie letter. He wrote it in the blood of one of the women. He talks about how he was going to cut off her earlobes and how he was proud of it. He was boasting, he was bragging about how excited he was. Nobody can catch me. That's a common theme among serial killers to this day and back then. They think they are invincible. They taunt the police in any way, whether it's leaving their own little signal. Jack was known to leave a little small cross somewhere on the women, whether it be on her collarbone, her leg, or her arm. Now, when a serial killer communicates with police somehow, that's rare. We don't see that very often. And that stood out to the police more than anything. And through that, they were even more determined to catch this killer. Queen Victoria herself even talked to the Metropolitan Police. She was scared for her people. Women of Whitechapel wrote letters to her. They signed petitions. This man was a dangerous killer, very dangerous. And while we don't know his name, and he has evaded discovery for 120 plus years, we know that to this day, he is the most significant, arguably the most significant killer in the history of criminology, because he forced criminology to evolve. He forced Scotland Yard to come up with Modus Operandi. He challenged the way that police forces looked at killers. He challenged the way of society. He challenged everything. People who study this man today are known as ripperologists. Ripperologists have dedicated themselves. True argument is that Jack the Ripper was the most significant man in the history of criminology because he was the reason that modus operandi was invented. And modus operandi is the way that we catch killers to this day. Thank you.